Look at this aircraft. It is the Airbus A321XLR. It is one of the hottest selling long-range narrowbodies in the world right now, with over 500 orders. But here is the twist that will blow your mind. This isn't a new idea. It is a spiritual clone of a plane Boeing built 40 years ago and then destroyed. The 757 was too good, too early. But why was Boeing blinded by short-term economics? How did they manage to retire an entire market segment by mistake? And did they realize they were writing their own tragic history before the ink was even dry? Here is what really happened. To understand this tragedy, you have to understand the machine itself. When the 757 entered service on January 1st, 1983 with Eastern Airlines, it wasn't just an upgrade, it was a revelation. In the 1980s, commercial aviation was often about compromise. You could have a plane that was efficient, or you could have a plane that was powerful. You rarely got both. But the engineers at Boeing managed to break that rule. They built an overachiever. The heart of this beast was its engines, enormous Rolls-Royce B211 power plants. Later models would offer Pratt & Whitney variants, but the result was always the same: raw, unadulterated power. We are talking about 43,500 pounds of thrust per engine. Think about that number for a second. That is a staggering amount of force for a narrow-body aircraft. It gave the 757 a thrust-to-weight ratio that was practically unheard of in commercial transport. It allowed the plane to rocket off the runway, climbing rapidly to cruising altitude, far above the weather and the traffic. Pilots didn't just respect this plane, they loved it. They called it the sports car of the skies. It responded instantly. It handled with precision. It made them feel like they were flying a fighter jet disguised as an airliner. But it wasn't just about going fast, it was about going where others couldn't. This power opened up the world. High-altitude airports like Denver or Mexico City, where thin air chokes standard engines, were no problem for the 757. Short runways that terrified other heavy jets were a walk in the park. And then there were the wings, long, efficient, spanning 124 feet and 10 inches. These wings weren't just metal, they were freedom. They gave the aircraft the ability to cross the Atlantic Ocean, battling headwinds that would force lesser jets to turn back or stop for fuel. It could carry 239 passengers over 3,915 nautical miles. It was a versatile marvel, a plane that could hop from city to city during the day and cross an ocean at night. So you have a plane that pilots love, passengers appreciate for its quiet, spacious cabin, and airlines can use for almost any mission. It sounds like the perfect product. And for 23 years it was. Boeing built 1,050 of them. It seemed like the 757 would rule the middle of the market forever. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. By the late 1990s, the atmosphere inside Boeing began to shift. The market forecasts were changing. The data coming into Seattle painted a new picture. The analysts believed the era of the powerful all-rounder workhorse was over. They convinced themselves that airlines no longer wanted versatility. They wanted hyper-efficiency on short routes. The airline industry was facing a crisis. The post-9/11 travel slumps and rising fuel costs were squeezing profit margins. Airlines were desperate to cut costs. In this new world, the 757 suddenly looked like a dinosaur to the executives. It was too powerful. It was too capable. Why carry all that extra engine power if you were just flying 2 hours down the coast? Boeing had a new darling, the 737 Next Generation. It was smaller, it was cheaper to operate, it was cheaper to maintain. For short hauls, it was the logical choice. And for the longer routes, Boeing pointed to the wide-body 767. In their minds, the market was a binary choice. Small planes for short trips, big planes for long trips. The middle ground, the specific niche where the 757 lived, was vanishing, or so they thought. So in late 2003, the decision was made. Boeing announced the end of production. It barely made headlines inside the company. It was seen as a housekeeping measure, clearing out the old to make way for the new. The final assembly took place in October 2004. The very last delivery went to Shanghai Airlines in April 2005. The line went dark. The tooling was packed away. The engineers moved on. Boeing believed they were closing the door on a redundant product. shocked. But in reality, they were closing the door on something they didn't fully understand. They were killing the only plane capable of bridging the gap between domestic hops and international voyages. And the tragedy is they did it right before the world changed again. Almost immediately after the production line shut down, the global economy shifted. Oil prices spiked in the 2000s. Airlines were bleeding cash. But at the same time, a new trend was emerging in travel. Passengers were tired of connecting through massive crowded hubs. They wanted to fly point to point. They wanted to go directly from their home city to their destination, even if those cities were smaller. Mid-range international routes exploded in demand. Suddenly, airlines needed to fly routes that were considered long and thin. Routes like New York to Berlin, about 3,500 nautical miles. Boston to Reykjavik, 2,500 nautical miles. Seattle to Dublin, 4,000 nautical miles. These were profitable routes, but they had a problem. They didn't have enough passengers to fill a massive wide-body jet like a 777 or a 787, but they were too far for a standard short-haul plane. Boeing tried to stretch their smaller jets. The 737 MAX could technically reach 3,550 nautical miles, but there was a catch. It gave the 757 a thrust-to-weight ratio that meant leaving cargo or even passengers behind. On the other end of the spectrum, the 787 Dreamliner was an incredible machine, but it was overkill. It was too large, too heavy, and too expensive to fly just 200 passengers across the Atlantic. A gap appeared, a gaping hole in the market between the largest narrow body. They unveiled the ultimate. The airlines looked at their fleets and realized they had a problem. They needed a plane that could carry 220 passengers, fly 4,000 to 5,000 nautical miles, and do it efficiently. They needed a plane exactly like the Boeing 757. But Boeing had destroyed the tooling. They had sent the workers home. They had nothing to offer in that 4,000 to 5,000 nautical mile sweet spot. While Boeing was struggling to plug the hole they created, their rivals across the Atlantic were watching. Airbus saw what Boeing didn't. They saw the gap, and they realized they didn't need to invent a brand new plane to fill it. They just needed to evolve. They took their A321 platform, a competent but standard narrow-body jet, and they started stretching its capabilities. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They just kept pushing the envelope of what a single-aisle plane could do. First came the A321LR, or long range, in 2018. It could fly up to 4,000 nautical miles. It was a warning shot. It showed that Airbus was serious about capturing the middle market, but they didn't stop there. They unveiled the ultimate version, the A321XLR, extra long range. It finally entered service in late 2024, and this machine was a direct strike at Boeing's empty fortress. It boasted a range of up to 4,700 nautical miles. But here is the killer stat. It offered up to 30% lower fuel burn per seat compared to the older generation jets like the 757. How? By using modern technology that Boeing had walked away from in this segment. The XLR utilized new generation geared turbofan or LEAP engines and optimized aerodynamics. The market reaction was instant and overwhelming. More than 500 orders poured in. Over 25 airlines lined up to buy it. United Airlines, American Airlines, the biggest carriers in the world, Boeing's most loyal customers, were writing checks to Airbus. Why? Because they had no choice. Executives from these airlines didn't mince words. They publicly called the XLR the 757 replacement we have been waiting for. United is set to deploy its first XLRs on transatlantic routes starting in mid-2026. They are taking the routes that the 757 built, and they are handing them to Airbus. This wasn't just a lost sale for Boeing, it was a humiliation. The very market segment they had pioneered with the 757 was now being totally dominated by a European derivative. So what was happening inside Boeing while this disaster unfolded? Surely the company that built the jet age had a plan. Well, they did. Or at least, they thought they did. Engineers proposed a project called the New Midsize Airplane, known in the industry as the 797. studies kicked off around 2015. The idea was to build a clean sheet design to reclaim the gap, a twin-aisle jet that would seat 220 to 270 passengers and fly over 5,000 nautical miles. It sounded perfect on paper. It would be the true spiritual successor to the 757, but with modern tech. But then the world came crashing down on Boeing. Starting in 2019, the 737 MAX crisis consumed the company. The fleet was grounded. The reputation of the aviation giant was in tatters. Financial hits kept coming. Then came the global pandemic decimating travel demand. And on top of that, relentless regulatory scrutiny. Boeing went into survival mode. Innovation took a backseat to crisis management. In 2020, they froze the 797 project. Now we are in 2025. The 797 remains a concept. It is a ghost. There is no formal launch. There are only whispers of internal debates. Should it have one aisle? Should it have two? While they debate, the market moves on. Even Boeing executives have been forced to admit the hard truth. A true successor to the 757 will not arrive until the early 2030s, and that is only if they commit to it soon. That is a decade of silence, a decade where Airbus runs unopposed. While Boeing sits in paralysis, the legends are leaving the stage. 2025 marked the symbolic farewell of the 757 fleet. On November 5th, 2025, Condor retired its last 757-300. It had served for 35 years. They flew a special round trip from Frankfurt to Vienna, carrying over 100 passengers who just wanted one last ride on the rocket. It was a nostalgic send-off, a celebration of a machine that had done its job without complaint for decades. 2 months earlier, on January 5, 2025, Jet 2 flew the United Kingdom's last passenger 757. It was a nearly 38-year-old aircraft, flying its final run from Manchester to Geneva. That flight ended 4 decades of 757 operations in Britain. The jets that once connected impossible city pairs are vanishing. They are being chopped up for scrap. Their metal is being recycled, but the routes they flew, they aren't disappearing. They are busier than ever, and who is flying them now? The replacements are already here, but they don't have a Boeing logo on the tail. Airbus A321XLRs are taking over those exact same routes. Early operators like Iberia and Qantas are already logging thousands of miles on test flights and commercial runs. The transition is happening right before our eyes. The 757 is checking out, and the XLR is checking in. And this brings us to the bitter irony of this entire story. The Boeing 757 wasn't outdated when it was eliminated. It was actually too advanced for its time. Its defining characteristics, that incredible hot and high prowess, that transoceanic range, are exactly what the modern market craves. The world today is defined by a greener, more fragmented route network. We want efficient planes that can go far. That is exactly what the 757 was designed to do 40 years ago. Boeing eliminated it not because the plane failed. They eliminated it because the company failed. They failed to imagine what came next. They looked at the numbers in the late 90s and saw a world that was shrinking, a world of short hops and hubs. They didn't see the world that was coming, a world where efficiency would trump brute force but where the market would still crave that mid-size punch. They assumed that if they stopped building the 757, the demand for that kind of plane would disappear. They were wrong. The demand didn't disappear. It just waited. Check out this next video to see how another aviation giant stumbled.